Hi planner friends, it's Sydney from Sid Plans It Out. Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, thank you so much for stopping by. Today we're continuing with my lettering series here that I finally decided to get around to, and we'll just see how this series goes. So in the last video we talked about different types of lettering, different styles, some tips and tricks, all that good stuff. All of these hot tips, I feel like, still apply to what we're going to go over today. But today we're going to talk about brush lettering specifically. I would like to preface this by saying that I have never, ever tried to teach anyone brush lettering. I've never tried to really explain it. So we'll kind of see how this goes. So the first thing I want to talk about are some different types of, we're going back to tools. So some different types of tools that, I guess it would just be pens and markers, but that I think are good for lettering. I'm going to start by saying you do not need brush markers, brush pens to start learning how to brush lettering. That's the biggest thing. So I have two different types of Crayola markers here. One great thing about Crayolas, like I said in the last video, they're super cheap. You can get them wherever you want. Like pretty much, I think like every store sells them. I honestly think you can buy them at the grocery store a lot of times. So they're definitely a good tool to have. So I have a Crayola, like a bigger Crayola marker, and then I have a super tip. So this is going to have the thinner tip on it, and then this one is going to be just your average Crayola marker. So we have Crayola, and you can see as I'm writing here that this gives all of the same vibes of brush lettering, but I didn't use a brush marker. I just used a Crayola marker. And then we have the super tip, which is also great for learning. The other thing with using a Crayola marker is, like I said, they're super cheap, right? So I think they're good for learning because a lot of what you're going to do, at least a lot of what I did when I learned, was I just did everything super exaggerated. Like I pushed down really hard when I wanted a downstroke and didn't push down like at all when I wanted an upstroke. So one nice thing with using a Crayola marker is they're cheap, and if you ruin the tip, it's not as big of a deal as if you're using, like an actual brush marker that costs you a little bit of money, something that you kind of want to use for a while and that you don't really want to like ruin the tip, So that is the first tool. The second one that I would recommend once you have kind of figured it out is, I would say, these Tombow Fudenosuke brush pens in the hard tip are great for learning lettering. They have the hard tip, just like with a Crayola marker. A Crayola marker is going to have a hard tip. It's going to make it so much easier to learn those strokes because it's not going to bend all over the place for you. It's going to really give you some resistance, which is going to help you to really get the letters to look the way that you want them to. Also, brush lettering, when you're learning, is a slow process. Slow process. Like, you're not going to just be able to magically write quickly when you're lettering at first. It really requires thought, and you really gotta go slow. The other pens that I like these Ritex Sign brush pens. They have a hard tip. I don't think it's quite as hard as the Tombow Fudenosuke or Fudenosuke, whichever way you would like to say it. But they are a little bit of a harder tip. I don't like the way that I just decided to do those letters next to each other, but that's okay. So you can see, I don't know if you can quite tell, but this one has a little bit more give to the tip than the Tombow did. So it's definitely going to be a little bit, I would say using this would be, it's definitely a little bit harder to use than the Fudenosuke when you're figuring it out. I would say now this is almost easier for me to use because it does have a little bit of give versus the Tombow or versus the Fudenosuke, but it definitely would have been hard for me to learn with these. Like, this is the pen that I really like learned with. However, I did ruin the first one and I had to get another one, which is why I think starting with the Crayola would be good. The other pen that I have here, so I don't have any Tombow dual brush pens, but I do have these Calligraph brush pens, like dual brush pens, but these are different than the Tombow. The Tombow, it has like the big broad tip and then it has like a fine liner. This one has a fine tip and then a broad tip. So I would say that this end is a little bit, you know, harder of a tip because it is that finer tip. I definitely think that using a finer tip brush pen is a lot easier when you're learning than the big broad tip. So if you're learning, I would not go out and buy a bunch of broad tip markers like this. These are also a lot harder to write in a smaller space because they do have that really broad tip, but you can see here, like, these are a lot harder to work with in the sense of you really have to know your letterings and how hard you need to push and don't push in order to make these letters happen. These are also way better, in my opinion. The broad tips are way better when you're trying to do something big than when you're trying to do something small. So those are the ones that I have that I like. I would say definitely start with something like a Crayola Super Tip, or a Crayola Super Tip, or a Tombow Fudenosuke with the hard tip. And then I would say move into the softer tips because it's going to be a lot harder to figure out the writing if you're trying to use something that's like big and broad like this. Like, this is so soft. Like, it just goes. It's very, very soft. Whereas like this side is a lot stiffer, which makes a lot easier clean lines without having to think about it as much. So those are those things. The next thing that I would say when it comes to brush lettering, I would start big. So start with bigger letters. Like, don't try to write inside these little tiny lines when you're just first starting out, in my personal opinion. I think it's easier to get the feeling of it down before you try to write it really little, because it's always going to be easier when you write it bigger. So for example, we'll just start with an A. It's a lot easier to write it really big than it is to write it really little. So we'll do, like if I were to write apple, this takes a lot less pressure on my hand and is a lot easier to do than it would be if I was trying to write it small. Like this takes more, it's more concise that you have to be. It's more like you have to pay more attention to what you're doing. Personally, I just think that writing it bigger first is better because it's going to get you used to how it should feel. So if I were to write normally, I would hold this like this, right? Like I would hold really close to the tip, very like strong like this, and that's how I would write. However, when you're brush lettering, you don't want to hold down as far and you don't want to hold it as tight. So this is more of how I hold the marker, like hold anything when I'm using brush lettering than when I'm like writing. So when I'm writing, I have it in between these two fingers, I'm down towards the tip and I'm really like holding on to it. But if I'm gonna brush letter, I usually have like 2 fingers on top, one, and then 2 fingers underneath, and my thumb is like way up here. And that is how I'm going to brush letter. It's a lot easier in my opinion. And like I said, I think it's easier to start a little bit bigger just to get the feeling of the letters. Okay. I'm trying to think of like how to make this logical. All right, so the feeling of the letters, like I was saying, so the hold is very different and the way you're gonna write is gonna be different. When I started this, I, like I said, was going very exaggerated and I was really like, this is a downstroke and this is an upstroke. This is a downstroke and then an upstroke. Like I was getting very potentially too aggressive, but it was helpful for me to really like dig into the feeling. That way I could do it for a more like prolonged period. I will say that your hand is going to hurt because it's not how you're used to holding a pen. It is a very different feeling than just writing. So just be aware that's how it's going to go, but practice is important in order to figure it out. So I know that there's a lot of out there, there's a lot of like worksheets and booklets and things on the different strokes. I didn't really do a whole lot of that, but I'm a very like visual and tactile person. So for me, I was looking at some brush lettering and then trying to replicate it myself because that's how my brain works. If your brain does not work like that, I definitely recommend getting, you know, one of those worksheets or booklets where you're just going through and you're doing the different types of strokes. So you have your down and then you have your up, you know, down, up, down, up, and then you're gonna do an up into a down, up into a down into an up, down into up, down into up, and then it'll be like those, right? Where you're going up, down, up, oops, up, down, up, down. So those are the types of strokes that you kind of want to practice. Like I said, for me, I wasn't really doing those. I was just looking at people's lettering and being like, oh, that's how you do it. Like, okay. So that's how I learned. I'm not sure if it's the best way to learn, but that's how it worked for my brain. So those are my suggestions to you. Kind of figure out, like, you know, how does your brain process things and go from there. I also started with my name, which maybe not the best choice, but it is what I started with. And I would say the thing that I worked on the most was really exaggerating that downstroke. So I'm going to do just like a basic S, like more of a cursive S than these that I did up here. But so an S would be, you know, up really light and then down. And then a Y, we're going to go down, up, down really hard. Like I said, like I was pushing into the paper. I don't know if you can tell, but I am pushing into the paper. And then for a D, we're going to go up, down, and then up and down. So it's really like very exaggerated is how I started, which is why I definitely think it's helpful to start that way and to just really exaggerate those movements for yourself. So I did start with my name. I wouldn't recommend that though. It was very interesting though to see the progression of my name as I continued, but I wouldn't recommend necessarily starting with your name. I would recommend like the alphabet if you're not going to start with these. So I've done a ton of A's now, but so with an A, you know, you'll be soft and then really push in, and then you're soft again until they meet, and then you're going to push down and then soft to create that tail. One other thing with lettering, like brush lettering versus like writing in cursive, like a lot of us know how to do from school, is brush lettering is very slow. It's very methodical. You're going to pick up your pen a lot more than you would if you were just writing in cursive. Like if I just wrote my name in cursive, like I don't really need to pick up my pen. But if I'm writing my name with, you know, like brush lettering my name, I'm going to pick up my pen in between all of the biggest stroke changes to make it flow the way I want it to. So I picked up my pen, like 5 times, 6 times during that. Whereas when I'm just writing in cursive, like I don't need to pick up my pen, I just go. So things to understand for sure. Let me get another piece of paper so I can kind of write some hot tips for you. Let me find one here. Okay, so I'm like trying to find everything to write with. Okay, so hot tips, that's what we're calling them. Hot tips. Let's get a more fun color because why not? All right. 1. Just like last time. Go slow. That is the biggest one. Go slow. 2. Practice. And also be kind to yourself and be patient and kind. We're sticking with those ones. We're pulling those from the last video. All right. 3. Lettering is slower than cursive. And then a little sub-bullet of that is pick up your pen between letters. Like that is the biggest one, is it's a lot slower than cursive and it requires you to pick up your pen in between letters. So let's see, what's a word that I could write? I mean, even if I just write Crayola again. So if I just in cursive do Crayola. Okay. I did pick up my pen in between that, but I think that's just because I'm used to it at this point. But if I do in lettering, we're going to do up, down, exaggerated, up, and then pick up the pen, down, pick up the pen, down, and then up, pick up, down, up, down, and then for this one I'm just going to do a straight L, I think. So I picked up my pen like 4 or 5 times writing that word. So it's definitely like you're gonna have to pick up your pen because it is different than cursive. It is slower, it is more methodical. It's just how it is. It's just how it's gonna be. So that I think is like one of the things that I struggled with at first, was I really just wanted to like breeze through it because I thought that that's how you did it, and it's really just not how it goes. The other thing, the grip is different. I would say it's looser and higher up on the pen / marker. So you can see here, like I said, I'm holding with just these two down really far. Even if I use, for instance, like this brush pen, I'm still gonna hold it the same where I have those two, even though it's very fine, like it's thinner. Because with this one, you know, I was holding it like that, but it's not because it's thick. It's because that's how you have to hold your pen when you're brush lettering. So if I were to write, I don't know, let's just write brush at this point. There's 2, 3, 4, 5 times that I picked up my pen. Again, still holding it like this, up higher. It's a much looser grip than if I was just writing. Let's see, what other things? I have some notes off to the side and I'm trying to like think, what have I not said yet? I think I've gone through most of the things that I wanted to say. I don't know that any of it really made sense. This is my biggest thing with videos like this, is I'm like, do I even make sense? I feel like it did. The other thing that I would just want to mention briefly with brush lettering is there's a lot of different ways that you can do it. So you can see up here, I did this kind of L, and down here I did this kind of L. The same thing here, I did a looping D. Here I did one with a straight. It just kind of depends on what kind of letters you want to do. Do you want them to be flourished letters? Do you want them to be really simple letters? Like what do you want them to be? So for instance, I wrote that one that way. Those are very like flourished. I could do just a straight down and then around. And I could just do, you know, some more basic type of lettering here. It really depends just how you want to do it personally. I kind of switch back and forth depending on what I'm writing, where I'm writing, how I'm feeling, kind of thing. It just sort of depends on how you would like to do it. So we can do, you know, an alphabet of A, and then B, C, D, so, you know, you can have these types of letters. You could also do your K's a couple different ways. I've done, you know, this type, or you can do, I'll go back in a second here. There's just a lot of different types of letters. So, yeah, I don't even know what else to say because I feel like at this point I've said so many things, but I don't know if they made sense. I should have tried to teach this to someone like in person first to see if what I was saying made sense. Also, X and Z are my least favorite letters when it comes to lettering and cursive. They just are not my fave. Okay, so some of the letters that I could write differently. So I'm going to do B, D, H, K, L, S. Those are the biggest ones that I would do that I could do differently. So let me get another color just to, you know, keep it interesting here. Let's use this green. Okay, so I could do a B like this, and then the same with the D. Just giving it straight lines. That'll be the same with like the H. Again, just straight lines. We can do, I usually do a K like that, but instead of doing it like curved, I'll do that kind of K, like keep it open. I could also do just a K like that. K is also one of my least favorite letters. It just, I don't know why it's so hard, but it is for my brain. And then I could do S like that. And then I also have like my straight L. There's a bunch of different ways that you can do it. You just have to figure out what letters you want. So find your style is my other hot tip for you. Let me just look at my notes here. I would just say the biggest thing is practice, practice, practice. Be kind and know that, you know, your lettering isn't going to be perfect right away. It's probably not going to be perfect for quite a while. I think that I've been working on my lettering for probably, I mean, almost since I started in the planner community, which was like 2 years ago. And I think that, I mean, I know that my lettering has gotten better over time. However, I feel like I didn't really start to see an improvement until like 4 to 6 months in. And then I really was like, okay, I'm definitely seeing a difference. I was not practicing as much as I should have been at first, but it definitely, like, the more I did it, the better the letters got, which makes sense. You know, it doesn't have to be, it's not rocket science, but it does require you to practice, and it does require you to really dig in and figure out if this is something that you want to work on. I have to say the biggest thing that helped me was really, really exaggerating that downstroke when I was trying to learn. It helped me figure out how to write those letters. I also feel like using a hard tip pen of some sort, so like a hard tip marker. So like I said, I learned with this Fudenosuke, but I ruined the first one. So I definitely think that a Crayola marker will do the exact same thing for you. And they're cheap, so if you need to replace them over and over, you totally can. I would recommend looking at different people's styles of lettering and just kind of figuring out like what works for you, what you want the letters to look like, what, you know, makes you happy when it comes to lettering. So I would definitely recommend looking at other people's lettering. I think that watching people do lettering is helpful without necessarily trying to like do it with them, just kind of watching them do it so you can see the way their hand moves. You can see how it is different than just your basic cursive, right? Like I said, if I'm just writing in cursive or just writing, I'm going to be holding this pen like this. But if I'm lettering, I'm going to be holding it more up here so that it's a little bit looser. It's more of a wrist movement than like your hand. I think that's the biggest thing. And it just like hit me is that when you're writing, you're using your hand. But when you're lettering, you're using more of your wrist to really drive those movements. So, for example, I'll go back to writing my name. Actually, let's do it. Yeah, no, we're going to do my name. I was going to say, let's do example, but no, that has an X in it. I don't want to do that. So, you know, if I'm just writing my name, this is all very driven by my hand. If I'm lettering my name, it's a lot more of a wrist movement. I don't know if you can tell, but it's a lot more fluid, you know, like we're going up and down and up versus like I'm writing, I'm just like, I'm using like these 3 fingers to move the pen. I'm using like my whole hand and my whole wrist if I'm lettering. I'll do it one more time just as an example. I would say that my lettering looks honestly almost better with this Crayola marker than it does with a brush marker. So, I mean, I think that Crayola Super Tips are definitely an easy way, a cheap way to get started on brush lettering. Either Super Tips or actual Crayola markers. It's up to you. I think the Super Tip might be a little bit easier just because a lot of brush markers are smaller. And I would say that after you're done with the Crayolas, the next kind of marker to go to would be a brush marker that does have a hard tip on it. So it's going to be like a smaller pen. And a lot of brush markers just in general have that smaller tip to them unless they're like, you know, this side of the Calligraph or like a Tombow dual brush pen. So I would say that the Super Tip is probably the easiest way to go, and they come in a lot of colors and all sorts of things. So I think that's all I have. Yeah, my only other tips to you with brush lettering is once you kind of get a hang of it, don't be afraid to put it in your planner. Like, just don't be afraid to do it. It's going to help you figure out how to write smaller. It's going to help you practice those words that you are using often in your planner. Also, our planners are kind of like time capsules of our lives, right? Like they're kind of like a memory type of thing, even if we're not using them for like memory planning, we're just using them for like our basic to-dos and day-to-day life and all that good stuff. It's kind of like, you know, it's a capsule of your life. So why not have your brush lettering practice in your planner, right? Like as you go throughout the months, you're going to go back and look and be like, wow, that's what my brush lettering used to look at. Look at it now. It looks so much better. And I have to say, it's very satisfying to do that. So highly recommend not shying away from lettering in your planner once you feel a little bit more comfortable. But I think that's all that I have. Please let me know down below if you have any other questions. I don't really know that I explained this very well, but I hope that I did. I hope that I helped. I hope I gave you something in this video. But that's going to be all for me. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope you got something out of it. If you did, I would really appreciate it if you gave it a thumbs up. If you want to see more of my videos, you can hit that subscribe button, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye, guys.